Make you back. We going? Oh, okay, we're going. All right. Huh? All right. Well. All right. Well, Mickey will be back in just a second, so we're going to talk about Yechezeqel 14. Well, the 14th part of Yechezeqel. We'll be discussing the 18th verse today. But so far in our study of Yechezeqel, chapter 1, we've gained a lot of insight into character traits, and we've learned a lot about perception. And this study is a deeper look into the subject of detailed perception that pays attention to the small things. And it's oftentimes what we're going to find out. It's the small things that get us because we don't pay enough attention to the smaller things. But let's talk to our Elohim, and then we'll take a look. So, Master Yahuwah, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for your word, and we ask that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word tells us, and so we can be more conscious of our actions. We thank you for it all in the name of Yeshua. Amen. All right. So, we're going to take a look at a verse that is kind of interesting. In the English, like most things in the English, it doesn't read the way it reads in the English in the Hebrew. But verse 18 reads, "As for their rings, they were high and they were dreadful, and they four had their rings full of eyes round about." So, we're thinking, okay, well, this is kind of a scary thing. It's got rings and it's got eyes all over it. And so let's take a look. We begin our look at this verse with the word vigabehen, that means as for their rings. But the root of this word is gab, that's used in this verse to say rings, but it actually specifically means a convex surface, something that's curved. And we consider that the eye is also curved, the lens of the eye. But also, it means, or it's used to describe the brow of the eye. So whether it's raised up or it's squinting down. So the word that follows it is vegobah, that from its root gobah means not only high, but also to exalt. And this word has a negative side in that it also means to be arrogant and to be prideful. Now, before we formulate any kind of ideas, we're going to take a look at the next two words, and then we're going to kind of backtrack to Shemot. But the next word is lahem, that means they, but it finds its root in the word halak, that means to walk or to go, as well as a way of living or a manner of life. This word comes from a similar root that's also halak, that means to come or to go. And the final word that we're going to consider before we construct an idea is the word veyira, that means and dreadful. But this word actually means to fear out of terror or to fear out of reverence. And the root of origin for this word is yareh, that means a moral fear or a moral reverence. So before we can formulate any ideas, though, let's take a look at Pharaoh in Shemot during the plagues. Say that Pharaoh would not let the people go. And everybody here, I think, is either read the plagues of Egypt or was there for the lectures of the plagues of Egypt. Would not let the people go. I think I'm stepping on myself or something. I don't know. Okay, there we go. But the word for, well, first of all, we start with Pharaoh. Now, Pharaoh is a representation. Our modern day theology says that Pharaoh is a representation of Satan. But Pharaoh is actually a representation of the ego. It's a representation of our carnal self. But that he would not let the people go. The word for people is am. It means people. But it comes from a root, amam, that means to be dark, to be dim. Now, if we take a look at the word amam, or even am, we consider, first of all, the ayin that represents perception. We say that the open mem represents the word, from the word mayim, the water, and the water is usually a representation, or always a representation, of the word of Elohim. So the open mem represents the topical word. What we open the Bible and we read, this is what we get in the open mem. So it's a revealed instruction. But the closed mem is a representation of Mashiach. That in the closed mem, the rabbis tell us that when Mashiach comes, he will be able to give us a deeper interpretation of Torah. The closed mem represents the anointing of Yahuwah that allows us to receive from the Ruach to understand the deeper interpretations of the Torah. So in the word amam, if we take the meanings of these letters, and the fact that it means a dim, to be dim or to be dark, then it represents a dim or darkened perception of the word, topically, and not being able to see the deeper meanings. So, we don't let the people go. What does this mean? That our ego does not allow us to let go of our dim views of the word, but if we were to apply this to our life as well, and say, we don't let the people go, then it doesn't allow us to let go of darkened perceptions about our situations either. So as a practical application, this is a very important thing. So now that I've gotten way ahead of myself, understanding this, we have the idea of our carnal self or ego's dark or dim perception of the word and its deeper meaning. Pharaoh would not let the people go. The carnal self or ego does not let this limited perception go. Now, if we take all this and we put it together, we come up with a very important question, aside from the initial question that Elohim asked Adam. He asked him, where are you? And this wasn't a question as, are you hiding behind a rock? He said, what is your spiritual state? But that was a very important question. But this leads us to another very important question, in that, how does my perception affect my walk with Elohim? And how does that walk affect my way of life? It is important here to understand that if we refuse to let the people go, if we do not let go of our dark or dim perception, even in its tiniest amount, did you get that? Even in its tiniest amount, we will remain in bondage, in the bondage of Mitzarim, or in Egypt. Now, Mitzarim is Egypt, but the root of Mitzarim is Matzor, that means to be under siege. Literally a city or a fortress that is under siege. And if we say that we are that city, then if we allow ourselves to be bogged down by the smallest little thing, we'll see that in a minute, that we're still in bondage and we're still under attack from something. We remain under attack from our desire to hold on to the people. In this state of being, the throne that represents the power and the authority of Yahuwah is obstructed from our view. Okay? When we read in Shemot that Elohim hardened Pharaoh's heart, The word for hardened there was kabed, that actually meant honor or respect. Yahuwah honored and respected Pharaoh's choice to not let go of the people. If we said that Elohim hardened the heart of Pharaoh, then we say, well, that's not fair. But if we read it the way it's supposed to read, Elohim respected and honored what Pharaoh wanted to do. So when we insist on holding on to a deep or a dark or dim perception, Elohim says, okay, if that's what you want, we'll go ahead and do it that way. Yahshua said that what we bind on earth is bound in heaven. What we loose on earth is let loose in heaven. If we keep a dark or a dim perception of the word as we walk, or if we keep a dark or dim perception of those things that we think are problems, then we're subject to the plagues, which were as follows. We had the plagues of Egypt. The first one was blood. It affected the water. Now, blood represents a curse, but what happened to the water? There was blood in it. There was dead fish in it. You can't see the water. It's called a lack of faith. So, in the blood, we start with a lack of faith. If we allow the tiny things to get to us, then we start to lose faith. The next thing was the Sephardim, the frogs that come from the root safar, that mean doubt. So we have a lack of faith that breeds doubt. The gnats, the kanim, the little things that are made into big things. The gnats, kanim, it's a little bitty bug that attaches itself and bites, but the root of kanim is kana, that means a big root of a big root of a big tree. So that little bitty thing, if you allow it to latch onto you, turns into something much bigger. We call it making a mountain out of a molehill. The swarm. Now, our Bibles say the swarm of flies. The Hebrew doesn't say anything about flies. It simply says a swarm. And it was a swarm that was so dense that people couldn't see, that people were confused and running about because it was just so much. So the swarm represents confusion, an inability to see or think clearly. When we lack faith, we begin to doubt. The little things turn into big things, and before we know it, we're confused. Then comes the death of the livestock, which when we studied the plagues, we found out that each and every animal was a representation of a part of our relationship with Elohim. When the death of the livestock takes place, I don't know if the pen's shaking or if I am, y'all make me nervous. The death of the livestock is a fading or wavering relationship with Yahuwah Elohim. So we start to lack faith, we start to doubt, the little things get to us, we begin to get confused, we begin to not think about our relationship with Elohim, and then comes the boils and the banes, seeking relief in the flesh. What can I do about it? Then comes the next thing, the hail, which is the initial separation from Elohim, resulting in the initial loss of fruitfulness. As we begin to step away from Elohim, the hail falls. Now, the hail didn't damage everything. There was still flax left in the field. But then come the locusts, and the locusts ate what was left. The locusts represent a complete separation from Elohim and his provision. There's nothing left that'll bear fruit. This brings us to the darkness. It's a point of becoming reprobate and no longer willing to seek the light of Yahuwah. And the last stage, if we allow it to get that far, is death of the firstborn. This is the final point of no return separation from Yahuwah Elohim, which is basically spiritual death. So we've said in the past that it's very important that we recognize when we're in a state of spiritual poverty so that we can begin to seek Elohim in order to make the correction. So Elohim asked Adam, where are you? And it's a question that we said some time ago that we have to ask ourselves regularly is, where am I? Why am I feeling the way I am? Have I got any little inklings of something there that's causing my faith to wane? So with this leads us to our consideration of the first and the second words of this verse, which are Vegabehen, Vegoba, translated as their rings, they were high. Vegabehen, we learned, referred to the brow of the eye in its convex form. We open our eyes wide, or we squint in order to see clearly. We open our eyes wide, or we squint in order to see clearly. It depends on how our eyes happen to be at that particular time. But in this, we consider, or we can, in order to clearly see, okay, there we go. The word vegoba, we learned, meant to exalt or to be prideful. So before we put any ideas together from these words, let's take a look at the word veyire that we learned meant dreadful or out of fear, out of terror, or to fear out of reverence. It comes from the root yare, means to have a moral sense of reverence or a moral sense of fear. Now, what is a moral sense of reverence and a moral sense of fear? That we act according to the word of Elohim, or we act according to what is right, and that we actually dread not doing the right thing. That's a moral sense of doing what's right. We recall our previous statement, and then we add in the things that we've put together, then we can come up with an idea that if we do not let go of our dark or dim perception, even in its tiniest amount, we will remain in bondage. This is to remain prideful and arrogant, even if we do not feel that we are. Our eyes are squinting, keeping out the light and keeping us in a state of negative fear. Now that's a very important thing. We hold on to a dim perception, but it's a tiny amount of dim perception. We might not even recognize that we're holding onto it. But to hold on to it is a form of pride and arrogance that we don't even recognize is there. But it is enough that it is held in respect in the realm of Elohim, and it's held in respect in the realm of Elohim, therefore it affects us here. Everybody understand what I'm saying? Even the smallest lack of faith can cause a negative condition. Okay? We can hold on to a dark perception in the smallest amount, not believe in the smallest degree, which throws everything out of whack, because that disbelief is held on to in the realm of Elohim. Is that, everybody understand it now? Okay. So, we have to be able, or wait, where were we? We will remain in bondage. This is to remain prideful and arrogant, even if we don't feel that we are. Our eyes are squinting, keeping out the light, and keeping us in a state of negative fear. We must be able to open our eyes wide and exalt Yahweh Elohim, releasing our negative perception. In other words, we have to be able to turn it over to the most powerful entity in existence and beyond existence, and then listen. Okay? We have to be able to let go and then listen for the answer. The answers to our most pressing problems don't materialize right away in the way that we want them to materialize. I've been battling with this last week. And when I put this lesson together yesterday, I realized that I was holding on to a little fraction of dim perception, that I wasn't trusting my Elohim, that I was trusting in the situation, and that only I can change the situation. But I didn't realize that I was doing it. But when I caught myself, when I started going through this, I caught myself, I said, aha, I've been violating the first 3 commandments, because I am not Elohim. I have to let this go to Yahuwah, the one who's in control of everything at every time, who is Elohim, my mighty judge, who has the authority to redeem me, deliver me from my anxiety, restore me to peace, and give me rest. So we do it, but we do it unconsciously. So we must be able to open our eyes wide and exalt Yahuwah Elohim, releasing our negative perceptions, letting the people go completely. In this way, we exalt Elohim and relinquish our throne in order to clearly see his throne. Where are we headed to here in this first chapter of Yechezeqel? We're making our way to verse 28, where the throne is. Now, so we have to relinquish our throne in order to see Elohim's throne clearly. We have to be able to, where am I? I lost myself here. We must be able to open our eyes wide and exalt Yahuwah Elohim, releasing our negative perceptions, letting the people go completely. In this way, we exalt Elohim and relinquish our throne in order to clearly see his. There we go. I got it out. The serpent was the subtlest of the creatures in the Garden of Eden. I tried to write the serpent was the most subtle creature, but spell check wouldn't let me. It said I had to put subtlest. So I guess that's a word now. But the serpent was the subtlest of the creatures in the Garden of Eden. So subtle that our eyes may be covered with scales and we do not even realize it. Paul thought he was doing the right thing. Paul thought he was doing the right thing until he was knocked to the ground, and then he realized that there were scales on his eyes and he couldn't see anything. And he actually had to go somewhere, being led somewhere, until the scales could be prayed away. So the serpent was the subtlest of the creatures in the Garden of Eden, so subtle that our eyes may be covered with scales and we don't even realize it. And if we understand this, then we will be able to grasp the next phrase that says, and they 4 had their rings full of eyes round about. So, thank you very much. We all understand that part. So, all right. This phrase again begins with the word, but it's a little bit different, vegabotam, that again illustrates eyes that are open or eyes that are squinting. We have to ask at this point, having considered what we have considered, how much light am I allowing in? The next word that we're going to consider is the word meleot, meaning full. Its root of origin is male, that means to fill or to be filled. Now this word, like just about all the other words, has a negative side, as that it also means to be fenced, to presume, and to be in opposition. How much light we allow in is our choice, and in the word melot, we have to consider the idea found in the letter chet. Are we behind the fence, a wall that does not allow the light to come through? That's the negative choice in het, that we remain behind a wall of, well, we can call it transgression, we can call it sin, we can call it pride. Or we can recognize that we're there and once again yoke ourselves to Elohim through his word. But are we behind the fence, a wall that does not allow light to come through? If our eyes are squinting, then we are allowing presumption in, and as such, we are in opposition to Yahweh Elohim as we are making ourselves Elohim. If this is true, then the next 4 words are critically important and offer a solution. The next word is Ein Nayim, that means eyes, or of eyes. This word is rooted in ayin, that although it does mean eyes, refers to the mental and spiritual qualities that we possess. This word is rooted in the letter ayin that represents perception, our ability to see, discern, and then act. When we add the word meleot to einayim, try to say that 5 times real fast. Einayim, okay. Then we recognize the need for our perception to be full or to be filled. Does something that is wide open fill faster and more completely than something that is partially opened? So the next 2 words give us more information. The words saviv le'arbatan, literally surrounding the 4. So let's consider a scenario that we've considered before. 4 men carried a paralytic but would not go through the door because all they saw was obstruction. Does your spiritual poverty carry you because all you see is obstacles in life? Considering this, we consider le'arbatan, the 4, the letter dalet that represents both the door and spiritual poverty. If we are squinting and holding a dark or dim perception, then obstacles are what we see, and even though we know that the door to Yahshua is wide open, all we see is the crowd obstructing it. When we truly realize this, then and only then can we truly make teshuvah, and then open our eyes fully, allowing Yahuwah to deliver us. And this is allowing Yahshua, the concept, to take place. Yeah, this is Yahshua. Okay. And this idea is represented in the word saviv, that means to surround, but its root is shub, that means to turn around. And its root, and it is the root of the word teshuvah. The truth being told, we are a lot like Kifa, who's stepping out of the boat to walk towards Yahshua, and he was doing okay. But then his perception kicked in, and his perception was distracted by the wind and the waves, and then he began to sink. It was only when he cried out for Yahshua that he was lifted up and placed back in the boat where Yahshua calmed the storm. So, are you seeing through squinted eyes? Or are your eyes wide open to be filled fully by the light of Yahuwah? So, there's your wheels full of eyes. So, I guess grooviness is achieved, and we'll go.